My name is Roger Daniel Alcacer. I am a television producer, a filmmaker, a toy collector, and somewhat of an illustrator. So I collect a lot of stuff. I collect movies, I collect music, I collect art. What I collect more of, especially now, is toys. I mean, I collect Star Wars stuff, I collect Masters of the Universe stuff, Thundercat stuff, just vintage toys from the 80s, from the 90s, properties such as Centurions. You know, I was a big fan of the cartoon, The Pirates of Darkwater, Ninja Turtles, Transformers, horror toys. I'm a big fan of Disney, so I do have a couple of like Disney collectibles, Disney toys, things like that. I collect 1/6 scale action figures, and I think that's where my collection shines the most. I also dabble in soft vinyl. I collect wrestling action figures. I was a fan of wrestling back in the 80s, 90s, up to the early 2000s. I collect mostly modern wrestling action figures, but you know, just of characters that I love and I grew up with. I collect custom toys, art toys, bootleg toys, toys by resin makers, things like that. It's a long answer as to why I collect. So aside from nostalgia and trying to fill a void in my life that just doesn't seem to be filled, I don't know if I necessarily collect because someday I'm gonna sell all this or get rich with all this stuff. I think it's just when I see something cool, I want it. I'd say about maybe 5% of the stuff I've ever bought, I've regretted. Everything else that I pick up, I pick up because, like I said, it looks really cool. Sometimes there's things I pick up because it reminds me of somebody, or you know, it represents something like a friendship or whatever. Like for example, there's certain things that I buy from friends, and I buy them just because they're my friend, and because that's a memory of that person. And then another thing is that ever since starting the magnificent world of toys, I tried to get a little piece or just something that's representative of everybody that I've ever interviewed. I mean, that's the main reasons why I collect. So I've been collecting since I was in elementary school. Actually, I caught the collecting bug from my cousin Ulysses, who started collecting comic books. And so every now and then he'd bring home a comic book or two. And so a lot of times, you know, he'd get these books and he'd kind of get bored of them and he'd hand them down to me. And then I remember we started making trips to the comic store and I'd start buying my own comics. My first comic book I ever bought, it was an X-Men comic book. And so it was like, ever since then, I kind of never looked back. And from comic books, it went to Garbage Pail Kids. And every kid at school had Garbage Pail Kids. And they were even banned at my school. And I actually got in trouble for taking them to school one day. You know, I was literally walking into school and for whatever reason, I had them in my binder. I just did a quick turnaround and all my Garbage Pail Kids flew out in front of the principal and in front of my uncle who had dropped me off. And some kid pointed to the principal and said, "Look, Garbage Pail Kids." And as he pointed, all the kids around me flocked towards them. They picked them up, but the principal collected them, gave them to my uncle, and I never saw those Garbage Pail Kids again. I mean, I've collected several things throughout my life, but when I started getting really serious about my collecting, that's when I kind of delved into the world of 1/6 scale. I started collecting 1/6 scale 10 to 12 years ago. That's when I really became what many would consider a serious collector, because that's not a hobby you just step into casually. You have to do your research, and I kind of found that out the hard way because, you know, I was basically buying the cheaper figures and just buying stuff that I didn't end up keeping and stuff that I wish I would have maybe saved my money to buy something better. But at that time, I was just excited that I was into something new. And not only that, I was really into it because of the ability to be able to customize these figures. And my whole thing was kit bashing. But then I started getting into the box figures, and basically it spiraled into what my collection is today as it relates to 1/6 scale action figures. When it comes to condition, as it relates to my collectibles, it really depends on what it is that I'm buying. I'll be at a flea market or a swap meet and I'll see a beater of an action figure that I never had, and I'll pick it up, especially if it's a good price. In that respect, condition doesn't really matter. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I buy, it's not with the intention that someday I'll resell it. As long as it's okay, sometimes I don't even care whether its parts function or not. As long as it's intact, even if it has a couple of war scars from some kid playing with it, that's good enough for me. One thing, like for example, when I buy vintage package stuff, I absolutely love when it has a price tag on it, whether it's a Toys R Us, a KB, or a pick and save price tag or whatever. It just adds to the nostalgia. I try to be as organized as possible with my collectibles. Sometimes I display them by genre, sometimes I display them by color. Some areas are just random. For the most part, I try to keep my stuff, somewhat organized, displayed by some type of category or whatever. Also, I try to set them up in a way where I can maximize my space as much as possible. But it's getting to the point where I'm gonna start kind of shuffling things around, like kind of like storing like a big chunk of stuff, and then just like maybe 1 month just have all my Star Wars stuff out, and then the next month maybe just my Masters of the Universe. But I want to start rotating things because I like looking at everything, and I hate to have stuff that I can't see. Dust does tend to bother me. I think I could do a better job at dusting my stuff, but it's very hard when it comes to 1/6 scale, and honestly that's the stuff that I should be dusting the most. And I can't tell you how many times I've pulled one out of a detolf, I drop a gun or I drop like an accessory, and then I can't find it for weeks, and sometimes I can't find it at all. So when it comes to 1/6 scale, yeah, dust does bother me, and I wish I could clean my stuff more often than I do. But you know, like I said, that's really the thing that kind of holds me back, is that. But then also I guess I get a little lazy. I'd say that Masters of the Universe right now and back then has been my consistent favorite. I didn't have many Masters of the Universe growing up, as I stated before. I did have a few, but I always longed to have them. As I grew up, I started collecting the vintage versions of them, and now that Masters of the Universe Origins are out, I've been very seriously collecting those, and I totally love those. They really bring back the nostalgia, and the fact that they're coming from Mattel adds a lot to it. And the fact that it's still a value figure. The price is climbing, but Masters of the Universe figures are still slightly cheaper than your average collectible figure. I've always loved science fiction, fantasy. I've also loved that Masters of the Universe have been, in a sense, like a value line, and as opposed to, you know, Transformers and even Thundercats, which were cool, and those were, you know, figures that I liked and that I wanted. But I mean, if Masters of the Universe were out of my reach as a kid, imagine those figures. So as far as my most cherished pieces, the ones that come to mind are probably my Centurions. I had been wanting to get all 3 Centurions complete for quite some time, because I've always thought they're just cool figures all together. And so one day I was able to find them at a PowerCon, and I found one of them at Kelly's Toy Stop, and I really like them. Although they're not like worth a ton of money, I just love the fact that I have all 3 and they're complete. Another very highly cherished possession was something that I kind of obtained, this has probably been the luckiest that I've ever gotten as it relates to obtaining a collectible or something. I remember going to the flea market one morning. I get to one guy's booth, and he had this table full of like posters and just like movie press kits, and then like coloring books and just a bunch of crap. And so there's a guy next to me, and I noticed he sets aside, like, I don't know, I thought it was a poster or something, but you know, I saw black and white. It looked like black and white comic book art. He sets it aside, and I take a good look at it, and I realize that artwork looks familiar. That art looks familiar. And then I look at the name, and it says Splat, Stephen Platt. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm like, why would somebody photocopy something like this? And then I started looking at it a little closer and I said, no, this is not photocopied. This is original art. This is the original cover of a comic book, one of Stephen Platt's first books. And so then, the weird thing was that it was enclosed in plexiglass and duct tape. And so, I asked the guy, like, how much. I don't want to say how much I paid for it. He gave me the price, like a very reasonable price. I couldn't believe it. I brought it home. I admire it almost every day. Another interesting thing about this piece is that I have a friend who's named Marlo. He worked for Image back in the day, and he knows a lot of these artists. He noticed that I had acquired that piece. And so he messaged me and he told me, you know what? I think that might have been Stephen Platt's actual drawing board. And I said, no way. And he says, yeah, I think that might have been his drawing board. So that's never been verified. But the fact that it could have been his drawing board, the fact that it's an artist that I love, and that it's basically a piece of comic book history, the comic book history that I grew up with, that just makes it priceless. It makes it priceless to me. Also, my friend Marlo brought me the actual book that pertains to that piece of comic book art. I think I'm gonna frame that, the book and the comic book art. But that's basically my most prized possession. I would definitely say I'm proud of my collection. I've worked very hard to obtain a lot of the stuff that I have. There's a lot of stuff that I have that I thought I'd never have in my lifetime. One thing I'm proud of, and it's funny, I want to go back to how friends and people that I've met have kind of changed my collecting habits a bit. For example, one person who's actually helping me out today with this interview, my friend Isaac Ramos. I had absolutely no idea about the world of soft vinyl. Yeah, I'd see a couple like cause themes here and there, like maybe the more popular stuff, but after him introducing me to this world of soft vinyl, I developed a liking and an appreciation for it. And as a result, I've started to acquire my own pieces. There's a couple pieces I've picked up from him because it's a reminder of my friendship with him. It's not so much the value or the amount of it, but it's what represents that I like about it and that makes me most proud about it. What does my family, friends, acquaintances think about my collection? Well, a lot of them, I'd say my friends, they've always thought it was cool. It was funny, much like my cousin was the guy who got me into collecting, got me into like pop culture, stuff like that. I sort of felt that growing up, a lot of the neighborhood kids and, my friends growing up, they kind of got that bug from me too. Like I remember I'd collect comic books and comic book cards, and sometimes like my little brother, he'd get my stuff and we'd go show it to my friends and whatever, and they'd get all excited about it, and they'd start getting into that kind of stuff too. But my friends, for the most part, they accept it. Nobody's ever been like, dude, you're weird or whatever. It's interesting because now with the magnificent world of toys, I've met a lot of other people who are like myself and are into this stuff just as much as I am. And so, of course they're gonna love it. And, and it's always great when you got friends who collect stuff. My wife, it took a while for her to kind of really just kind of see the value in it and just the happiness that it brings me. Nowadays, she's kind of become more of a person who encourages me because of what I did. She would tell me, you should start some kind of YouTube channel or something, where you talk about this stuff or whatever. And so, she was part of the inspiration for the magnificent world of toys as well. If there's anything I can have more of, obviously would be space. If there's any pieces that I'm really looking for that I hope to get in my lifetime, it's actually a goal to try to get this piece. It would be the Seven Samurai set from Alfrex. The Seven Samurai is, quite frankly, my all-time favorite film. It just makes no sense that I'm a toy collector, a movie collector, and I don't have that set. Also, a Bengali, an original Bengali from Thundercats. That's just kind of, it's funny because growing up, I had no idea that figure existed. And I used to see him around like at shops and flea markets and things like that all the time, but I remember back then, I didn't really have the money to buy him. I thought, back then it was you could get them for like 75 bucks or whatever, but I had like a minimum wage job, so I couldn't really like pick him up. Also, there's a 1/6 scale George Romero Joker coming out, and that's one figure that I'm really hoping that I can get. And then there's a Tarman from Trick or Treat Studios, which I haven't been able to get, and I'm hoping to get that figure as well. Nowadays, there's toys of almost everything, or as far as I know, most of the things I've ever thought about, like, wow, I wish there was a toy of this, or I wish there was a toy of that, eventually it got made. And that's kind of what happened with 1/6 scale. If it hasn't been made, I'm sure sooner or later it'll be made, but there are some of those where I don't know if we'll ever see them. I mean, I'd love to see like Terminator 1 Sarah Connor with like her tie-dye shirt. I think that would be cool. One toy that I would really love to see made, I doubt I'll ever see it made, and I've considered having one made, either trying to make it myself or having a custom one made, is Poison Ivy from the Cramps. An action figure of Poison Ivy I think would be freaking amazing. One of my all-time favorite action sci-fi movies is The Running Man, and although an artist by the name of D. Chung released a Ben Richards figure, I would love to see some of the toys of the Stalkers. I mean, I think they would be great. I mean, some of them look a little goofy, but I think in action figure form, they would look fantastic. I hope you enjoyed this profile of myself. First of all, I'd like to give a big thanks to my friend Isaac Ramos, who took the time to come out here and actually interview me, ask me these questions. And you know, you can find Isaac on Instagram as @realfanshitonly, but also check him out on Instagram as @peacesports and stuff, so you can see some of his merch and, you know, some of his other things that he does, like cycling and all this other stuff aside from toy collecting. And you can find me at The Magnificent World of Toys on Instagram, and obviously on YouTube on this channel where you tuned in to watch this. And so if you like this, if you like our videos, please feel free to comment, like, subscribe. I read all the comments. I try to respond to as many of them as I can. And then also, I mean, just, hey, if you're new to the channel, just browse, you know, some of these playlists, check out some of these videos. If you like what you saw, I guarantee you're gonna see a lot more really cool stuff on this channel. And there's a lot more stuff to come. So thank you once again for joining us. Thank you, Isaac. And may those who play never gray. Take care. All right.